Hi, today we're going to be working on cell theory. And before we get started on our slides, we are going to watch a video over cell theory real quick. Let me make sure that my volume is all the way up.
To us modern folk, we tend to take for granted the existence of cells and the idea that all living things are made up of cells. And we, as human beings, as living organisms, we're made up of many cells. The estimates of the cells in the human body are on the order of 37 trillion cells. But if we were to rewind even 400 years ago to the 1600s, this wasn't so obvious. And that's because people really didn't have the tools to make direct observations of cells. They didn't know that these cells were around. They didn't know that things like unicellular organisms even existed. But all of that began to change with Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke was able to leverage primitive microscope. And this is a picture of his microscope. When you see this, you appreciate how these relative to what we have today, how primitive it was. He had lenses here that would provide some magnification, but he had to use this right here. This is a flame, and we're able to channel that light so that it gets reflected over whatever is observing. And in 1665, he publishes the Micrographia. Probably not pronouncing it right. So this is 1665. Robert Hooke publishes this. And in this, he describes and he draws a lot of his observations using his microscope. And he has some fascinating drawings. He's quite a good artist, where he's able to draw pictures of his observations of things like mice and fleas. But it's not just lice and fleas that he's able to observe. He actually takes a look at some cork cell, or what he sees as cork. And when he makes an observation, he says, look, there are these little squares over here. And this kind of seems to be somehow kind of a basic unit of this cork. And he says, well, this kind of reminds me of these little rooms that monks live in, which we call cells. So he calls these cells, and that's where the word comes from. He calls them cells in micrography. That is a cell. Unfortunately for us, he was a great artist, and he was really good at drawing things, and he drew a lot of his micrographia, but we don't have any pictures of Robert Hooke anymore. It's a fascinating story. Most theories are that actually it was Isaac Newton who burned the only original painting that we have of Robert Hooke. And that's another intriguing story that we can talk about at a future date. But when Robert Hooke, he coined these things cells, but he was looking at dead tissue, and actually he was looking at the remnants of cells, and what he saw was really just the cell wall remnants. He wasn't actually able to observe directly living cells, and he didn't have enough to go on to think, hey, maybe this is a building block of all life. Maybe cells themselves reproduce, and all cells come from other cells. And that doesn't start to get developed until we get further on into history. You go a few years later, we get to Antony van Leeuwenhoek. I'll be pronouncing it right. But he was a Dutch lens crafter, and he was inspired by Hooke's work. He says, well, hey, I can craft lenses. Maybe I can use that to make better microscopes and make better observations. And he was able to do that. And doing that, he was able to directly observe living cells, living unicellular organisms. So he was able to directly observe sperm. He said, wait, this thing is alive. He was able to directly observe protists. So these unicellular eukaryotic cell walls, things that look like unicellular animals. And he called them actually animalcules. Molecules. Saying, hey, look, these look like these little mini animals going on here. And so he's trying to say, well, maybe this is some form of a basis of life, or at least he's trying to say that at this very small scale you actually have life. But a fully modern theory of the cell doesn't really start to emerge until we get another 150 years into the future, and we get to the early 1800s. So if we fast forward to the 1830s, these two gentlemen, Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann, come into the picture, and they're the ones that start laying the foundation of what we could call modern cell theory. So modern cell theory, and using their observations and kind of what they were able to deduce, they said, hey, maybe all living things, all life is composed of one or more cells, one or more more cells. And today we kind of take this for granted. This wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious that all things were a building block for life, one or more cells. And then following it, all life is composed of one or more cells. And you can also say that a cell is the basic unit of life. Cell is the basic unit of life. And these are strong statements that all life, if you were to get down small enough, you're going to come to cells, living cells that make up that life. Now, this is our full, complete cell theory. And both of these gentlemen, they knew that cells could come from other cells. They were able to observe cells reproducing. But it still was an open question. Maybe some cells come from other cells, while others, maybe they somehow get spontaneously created if you have the right elements and the right amount of conditions. Maybe they somehow just emerge out of nothing. And it wasn't until this third tenet of modern, it wasn't until the mid-1800s that we get a third tenet of modern cell theory that gets established. And this is this idea that all cells come from other cells. All cells from other cells. And the real father of this idea, the one that really established this, is this gentleman right here, Robert Remak. Now, sometimes the credit for this goes to Rudolf Virchow right over here, but it turns out that he plagiarized Remak's work. Right over here, so it's really Remak who deserves the bulk of the credit for this tenet that all cells come from other cells. And once again, he wasn't the first person to say, hey, you observe that some cells come from other cells, but say, no, this is a fundamental thing. All cells, this is how they actually come about. They don't just somehow spontaneously emerge. Now, whenever, even in today's world, people see this last thing, all cells come from other cells, there's a natural question, well, there must have been a first cell, or an initial set of protocells, and people aren't 100% sure. But when we look back at the evolution of life on Earth, we think the first cells emerged about 3.5 billion years ago. And we're not 100% sure about how they emerged, but there are some theories. For example, we have videos on phospholipids. It turns out that phospholipids naturally form bilayers. So phospholipids naturally form bilayers, and they can actually form spherical membranes that have phospholipid bilayers. So that kind of gives you a start, so that can spontaneously form. And there's also theories that maybe information, the machinery of cells, maybe their ancestors were 3.5 billion or longer ago, and it might have been maybe it was self-replicating RNA molecules, or maybe it was somehow self-replicating protein. And over time, over very large, were able to start replicating themselves, have more sophisticated machines. The ones that had kind of were approaching our modern cells were able to reproduce more, were able to take advantage of more of the energy and resources in the environment, so that we eventually get with our modern cells. This is a fascinating question, and it's still an area of research.
Okay. So now that we've read that part, let's go ahead and talk about cell theory. Okay, our essential questions for today is, what is the cell theory and what are similar functions of all cells? If you were quizzed today in your semester grade, depending on it, which one do you think, based off of the information you've listened to, would you be able to answer confidently, and which one would you need to be able to learn more about before you can answer it confidently? That's where you're going to put your answers in right here. Cell theory is the smallest structural functional unit of an organism. It's usually microscopic, and it contains cytoplasm and a nucleus enclosed in a membrane. It has two types of main cells, a prokaryotic, which means no nucleus, and a eukaryotic, which has a nucleus. Robert Hooke observed the bark of cork trees under a microscope. He thought that the objects looked like individual rooms in a monastery, which were called cells. He called his discovery cells. He did not know their true function. Were the cork cells observed by Robert Hooke living or not living? This is what you're going to answer right here. Anton van Leeuwenhoek developed the microscope lens to see for greater magnification. He was the first person to observe the bacteria in protozoa, which is a single-celled animal. He observed and described the red blood cells in 1670. Matthias Schleiden concluded all plant tissues were composed of cells. He declared that the cell is the basic building block of all plant matter. He sensed the importance of the nucleus of a cell. What type of cells did Matthias Schleiden study? This is where you're going to write your answer here. Theodor Schwann concluded that all animal cells were composed of cells too. He collaborated with Schleiden to form a new theory in biology. What types of cells did Theodor Schwann study? You're going to type your answer in right here. Now let's think about it. Schwann stated that all animals were made of cells, but animals were made of many different types of cells. For example, there were 3 different types of cells that make up 3 different types of muscle tissue in humans. How could you prove these were all cells even though they looked different and made different tissues? You're going to type your answer here in 3 to 5 sentences. Schleiden and Schwann's ideas became known as the cell theory. 1. All organisms are composed of cells. 2. Cells are the basic unit of life. This theory was important to biology as the atomic theory was to chemistry. There was more pieces of the puzzle to the cell theory. Where did the cells come from? Rudolf Virchow. Rudolf Virchow proposed that the 3rd part of the cell theory, number 3, is all cells result from the division of previously existing living cells. This idea became a key piece of the modern cell theory. Now for our quick action, you're going to tell me who is Robert Hooke, what is the cell theory, who are Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann and Rudolf Virchow, and what are the 2 main types of cells? You're going to drag and drop your answers here. Let's think about it. Think about what it would be like to go back in time and be one of the scientists working on the ideas that would become the cell theory. Choose one part of the cell theory and describe an experiment that you would do to give evidence to support your claim. So right here, you're going to look at each one of these principles, and then you're going to tell me what kind of experiment would you do to prove that particular step in the cell theory. Functions of cells. You have metabolism, which is the chemical reactions inside the cell. You have the response, which is perceiving and responding to the changes in the environment. And homeostasis, keeping conditions inside an organism within tolerable limits, which means that it is balanced. Over here to the right, we have chemical reactions inside the cell break down the food we eat into macromolecules. What cell function does this describe? Is it metabolism, response, or homeostasis? Functions of cells. They grow. You have growth. It increases the size. Reproduction reproduces offspring sexually or asexually. Nutrition means that it obtains growth to provide energy for growth. Obtaining food to provide energy for growth. Defense, protection against enemies. A cell turns glucose from the food we eat into energy from for our body to use. What cell function does this describe? Is it going to be growth, reproduction, nutrition, or defense? Here you're going to take and match the definition to the meaning. You're going to draw an arrow, or you can draw a line, or you can take and move, copy and type in the text box what each one of these definitions are. Let's do a think about it. Anton von Leeuwenhoek created microscopes that could magnify objects 10 times better than anyone else at his time. In fact, his methods of grinding glass lenses were so precise it would be used 150 years before anyone outdid his work. Imagine, though, that microscopes never existed. What part of the cell theory would we still be able to figure out, and why? Which part would we be able to figure out, and why? Would it be all organisms are composed of cells? Cells are the basic unit of life? Or will it be all cells result from the division of previously existing living cells? For our cell theory here, we're going to determine the person and the accomplishment that they did. So you will drag the person to the appropriate date, and then you will take and tell me what they did by dragging that accomplishment to this lower box. Feel free to look at your previous slides to be able to have the dates and the accomplishments and the persons. I want you right here to tell me what a cell is. Then you're going to name the scientists and their discoveries related to the cell theory. So you're going to give me their names, and you're going to tell me what did they discover, or what are they known for. I want you to list 3 parts of the modern day cell theory right here. And then if you still don't understand one of the essential questions, which one is it and why? And if you understand them both now, I would like you to tell me why you think you understand them both.